then short of collapsing all these authorities that were established to look at the safety of food and feed. That is the ministry department that dealing with veterinary services, crop development, livestock, the public health, medical services, the ministry in charge of fisheries, agriculture and food authority. Mr. Speaker, even if you just pick on the agriculture and food authority, remember we used to have various boards, including the pyrethrum board, the sugar board, the crop, and other cashew nuts and the nuts board, and they were collapsed into one entity called Agriculture and Food Authority. The impact of what AFA has done by collapsing all this independent board that seems to have been given the same mandate, carrying out the same thing. And the collapse of it, of course, as the advantages of reducing even the cost of running, the monies that we put into these boards, and making them more effective. The Kenya Dairy Board, the Kenya Plant Health Inspectorate Service, Mr. Speaker, KEFIS is domiciled or mostly dominant in my constituency. One of their plants and the vast land is around my constituency. I've seen their work in the field of testing the health of the imported seeds before they are now relayed to the farmers. And of course, it was also a collapse of other small entities that were dealing with the same thing. And remember, we used to even have Kari and the KEFIS were more or less doing the same thing. And now some of the functions were transferred to now what we call KALRO, that is now been more effective. Pest Control Products Board, Fertilizer and Animal Foodstuff Board, National Biosafety. I agree with the intent of this bill because this is more or less collapsing all this into one. In fact, it could have even been more effective to have it into one entity with various departments relating to different areas of operation in terms of whether it is food or animal feeds or seeds, whatever the case. But the most important is to ensure that whatever comes into this country meets the standards of safety as pertains to human consumption. Mr. Speaker, I support the bill with the regard of trying to put most of these agencies on the board. And the Speaker, it is also paramount to note that most of the time when we pass bills in this parliament, we don't take so much cognizance of the operationalization of some of these authorities that we intend to form. We recently had to repeal a bill on social assistance of the vulnerables in our society. Just 2 years down the line, after that bill had been passed by this parliament, we had to repeal because it was impossible to operationalize that board. The authority that was envisaged to be formed could not get the much needed funding by the government. So the continuous enactment of several bills that eventually lands into a dustbin or on in some shelves that are not being able to be implemented by ministries has always been our undoing as a parliament. So this is also a wake-up call to this parliament that we should not be passing laws so quickly, whether emotionally or out of national popularity. We need to look at them even eventually how we are going to make them into use. We need to make sure that as we pass them, we envisage a future that we have an organization that is well catered for in terms of exchequer funding, and an organization that is going to stand the test of time. So, Speaker, this is the onus on this parliament to make sure that the bills that we pass here meets the quality standard of establishment that we need to have in this country, with proper mechanism, with proper staffing, proper funding, so that we don't just pass bills for the sake of it to excite the crowd, to excite the people of Kenya, and eventually, later on, we are back here again trying to repeal the same acts that we passed, so that we either collapse some of the organizations due to lack of funding, operationalization, for whatever reason. And the more so, Mr. Speaker, I have to say this. Some of these moribund organizations, they look like they exist, but they don't actually exist. They exist on paper. But in real sense, some of them are used as conduit of corruption. This is where donor funds are directed or misdirected for consumption by a few people. So we also need to know the operationalization of some of these entities that were formed either by an act of Parliament, by a legal notice, by executive orders. What was the need? What was the prevailing circumstances upon which these things were formed? Because they later on become moribund, they are used wrongly by unscrupulous officials we put in, and we misdirect our funds there. Most of allocation in some of these ministries, you'll find that they are allocated in a very more or less a makeshift organization. But because they've found a loophole in an act of Parliament that we passed, establishing these authorities and the boards, then they have a legal standing to direct money there. And this is how the loss of money from various ministries have gone to waste. So, Mr. Speaker, I stand to support, but with a caution that as we pass laws and we pass acts here to establish whether it is a coordination body, whether it is an authority, we must also know how are we going to fund it. What is the nature of staffing? There are some organizations that you walk in from the CEO to the sweeper is from one tribe, because either it is regionalized, because of either is a region, an activity based in that region, and people think like if it is something to do with maize, then this has to be Rift Valley. If something to do with sugar, this has to be maybe Western, and so on and so forth. And therefore, it becomes a tribal entity. And you'll find that from the CEO downwards, all the people who are working there are from one tribe. So we also need to know, eventually, are these entities going to meet even the national cohesion parameters of making sure that all Kenyans also get a chance to be part and parcel and contribute to the well-being of the society. Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I beg to support.
The Honorable Didmus Barasa, but before then, let me, Honorable members, acknowledge the presence in the Speaker's gallery, or even if they have left, the following schools that have been here and were able to visit us. Number one was Eronge Adventist School from Bochari constituency, Kisii. We had Tasia School, Embakasi West constituency, Nairobi City County. And we have had Garissa Academy, Garissa Township constituency, Garissa